Hello everybody, thanks for taking the time to check out my video. My name is Chris and this is my channel We Love Comics. And today I'm going to give some helpful tips for people that are looking to either just get into collecting or somebody that's been collecting for many years. Tips on how you could buy, sell, and even trade comics and get a better experience. Before I start, I just want to let people know at the end of every video, I do a surprise subscriber shout out. So if you watch at the end of the video, one of the people that subscribe to my channel will get a shout out. So if you leave comments, like, and share, and you are subscribed, you will eventually get a chance. So hopefully you'll watch until the end of the video. So with that being said, let's give some of the tips that can hopefully help your comic book experience be a little bit better. Now, when it comes to the basics, obviously, buying low and selling high is the best way to go. Now, unfortunately, most people don't think that way. The reason being is they tend to use emotion to purchase their comic books. And you notice a lot of times people will buy comics as they are getting more and more expensive, and they tend to ignore them when the prices are low. And there's many comics that have potentials that you won't buy because of the fact that it's too low. Well, the best chance to get them and get more quality comics is to buy them when they're lower. So don't always go by trends. Try and get the information beforehand and buy them early. So what I would recommend is take chances on rumors. For example, if you hear from sources that there's going to be a particular character in an upcoming movie, now, obviously, movies can change and they can take away or add new characters, but if you get a comic early before anybody else knows about it, you don't run the risk of spending large quantities of money in order to purchase. So sometimes it's a gamble if you're doing it for investment purposes. Obviously, if you're collecting just to collect, then it doesn't really matter. It's all about having fun. But make sure if you're going to pounce on a comic that's going to be hot, try and get it beforehand. The other way to benefit from that is wait until there's a little bit of a lull, because as soon as an announcement's made, if you don't catch it early, a lot of times you're going to see a comic book spike. There's always a lull because there's always going to be something else to distract people. So if you don't get it right away, don't just buy based on emotion and say, I have to have it at this moment. See if you can wait to get the price to drop when something else is being discussed. So you really want to try and get things as soon as you can and pounce right away. And if you can't, wait a little bit. Another thing I can definitely not stress enough is be patient when buying comics. Again, this has to do with emotion. A lot of times when people have a comic book that they really, really want, they're willing to spend twice, maybe 3 times more money than it's valued at, or even that it's worth, depending on the condition, because they want it right away. And the one thing I can tell you is, especially if you're shopping around, comics will always show up. So if you're looking for a particular comic and it comes up and you think, oh, I got to buy it, and the price is normally $100 and it's somebody selling it for $200, don't spend the extra money. My advice is wait it out. It could take weeks, months, or years. But if you are patient enough, you will get a better deal and a better quality comic. So don't always go on emotion. As far as eBay is concerned, many people buy their comics on eBay. My advice for tips on getting the best deals, I have a video that teaches one particular way, so I hope you check that out. It's in the description. I'll place that in the description below. But you want to look late at night, usually after 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, because the later you could stay up, the less likely people are going to be on the internet. So if you could stay up late, you're going to get much better deals. Also, holidays and special events, like, for example, the Super Bowl, where people are going to be concentrating and focusing their energy somewhere else. So if you could do it in the middle of Christmas, or if you could do it, like, for example, like I said, in the Super Bowl, there's going to be a lot less people, which means you have a better chance of getting a better deal. Another thing, research before you buy. When you have a specific comic that you're looking for, don't just go into like eBay or a comic book store blindly. Search out that comic, learn as much as you can about it. Go to, for example, eBay and see particular comics that you're looking for that have already sold to get an idea of what type of prices that people are willing to pay for the books. The more information you research, the better chances of getting a better quality book and not being taken advantage of. So like they say, knowledge is power. So make sure you research before you buy. Never be afraid to ask for discounts or deals. Now, whether you're doing it on eBay or you're talking to somebody on a comic book channel or even a comic book store, the worst somebody can say is no. So I know a lot of people tend to be timid when it comes to this. But just ask. Like, for example, if you go to a comic book store and you see a book on the shelf, you say to them, would you take off 10% for that book? Or do a package deal. If I buy these 2 or 3 comics, would you give a package deal? The worst they can say is no, so never be afraid to do that. Also with eBay, when people have a buy it now or best offer, what I always recommend is try at 50% off of what they are listing. Some will just automatically dismiss it. Some will come back with a counter offer. And believe it or not, there are times where people will agree because not everybody selling comics is a comic lover or a comic collector. Sometimes people are just selling them because they found them in their attic, or they get married and their spouse doesn't want them to have them anymore and they just want to get rid of them, or somebody that just got them passed down to them that have no interest in comics at all and just want to get rid of them for some money. Or just the simple fact that somebody is desperate for any money they can to pay maybe a bill. So never be afraid to make an offer. The worst that can happen is they reject it. Another thing that you should do, as far as places to find comics, search yard sales. You could get plenty of deals. I've had many a deal where I've bought very expensive comics for very inexpensive prices. 2 other places that you could check that most people may not even think about are antique shops and pawn shops. These are places that will have comics, and sometimes these are people who have no idea what they're selling, and you'll find a $100 comic for $5. So check out local stores. Also, go on places like Facebook and Craigslist. Make sure you get to know the people, though, before you make any purchases or go to somebody's house. So please be careful about that. Unfortunately, there are some dishonest people out there, so you really want to get as much information as you can. And if you are going to go to somebody's yard sale or Craigslist ad, make sure you bring a friend and have people know where you are. Because unfortunately, like I said, there are some bad people out there. You also want to look for graded books that you can upgrade from. In other words, let's say, for example, you get Iron Man 55 and it's graded at a 5.0, but you notice that a pressing or a dry cleaning could actually raise the price. Now, depending on the book, this could raise the value of the book hundreds of dollars. So if you get the opportunity, especially on eBay, you get to look at pictures. See if you can find already graded comics that somebody either didn't know or didn't bother to have pressed or dry cleaned, and then you could just take them out of the labels, have them pressed and dry cleaned, and end up with a more valuable book. So that is definitely something to look for. Advice as far as movies or TV shows are concerned. Now, this is for people who speculate. In other words, people that buy books to turn around and flip them. Now, whether you do that or not, that's up to you. There is no right or wrong way, because if you collect comics and you purchase them, it's your money. You could do with them whatever you want. But what my advice would be, if you're looking to flip a book, and flip a book means to buy it and then turn around and sell it. If a villain is going to be in a movie or TV show, most villains tend to be one and done. You see that in a lot of movies where people like Ultron, Apocalypse, and many others, they'll be in one movie and then they're done. So you'll get a big buzz and then it's going to die off. So if you're collecting to sell them, as soon as you hear about a villain being in a movie, purchase it at the cheapest price you can, wait until some trailers come out, and then turn around and sell it. Because what'll happen is, once the movie's over, if that villain is destroyed, and he's a one and done, or she's a one and done, that comic is going to dramatically drop off in price. So again, if you're collecting comics for the fun of it, it won't matter. But if you're looking to make a profit, you want to turn around and sell that book as soon as you can before the movie starts. Because especially if the movie's not good, then that book is really going to plummet. I recommend usually after the first announcement to buy it, and around the first trailer. Now, if it's a comic book hero, a lot of them tend to have multiple movies these days. So my advice, again, pounce on it as soon as you can and hold on to it. Because especially if the movie is good, and you could see a lot of comic book movies these days really are, they tend to have more than one movie. So if you miss the opportunity in the beginning, wait until after a movie is done. Wait a couple of months, because there'll be that lull that the movie's already done and the second movie is going to be a year or two away. And again, with other distractions, people will not focus on it. So that's the time where the price will go down. Now, obviously, if you get it just as or before the movie has been rumored, like I said earlier, take a chance. You're going to get the best deal. So even if there's a dip in between movies, it's probably not going to be as cheap as when you could have bought it earlier. So, to the victor goes the spoils, and the early bird gets the comic. But if it's a hero, they tend to have multiple movies. So if you think you can get a good deal on a really good movie, then purchase it and hold on to it. Now, as far as emotions, and I talked about this earlier, never get too down or up. There are times where I've purchased comics, sometimes on speculation, sometimes advice from friends, sometimes to just take chances, where I spent some money on it and the book didn't pan out. In other words, a TV show didn't come, a movie wasn't that great, a character was a one and done, and you end up losing money. Well, if you did it for the fun of it, it doesn't matter. So don't get yourself destroyed. And there are plenty of books that I've bought for cover price or bought for very minimal fees, and all of a sudden a movie is announced a couple of years later, and that book I spent $15 on is now a $200 or $500 book. So don't get yourself too high and low in the emotions, because again, that will go back to the buy low and sell high. If you have a book that you spent a lot of money on and you see the price going down, people tend to panic and they'll start selling on the way down. And that's why people don't usually buy when things are low. They wait until it's very popular and quote-unquote trending. So if you're doing it for the fun of it, it won't really matter. So if you lose out in the deal, you know what? If you enjoy the comic and it's a great read, then it doesn't matter. If you have one or two that succeed, then, don't get all excited to the point where you think, oh, now I'm going to make a living doing this. It's a gamble, and it tends to even out. Basically, as far as books to get, as far as speculation is concerned, first appearances obviously are great. Origins are always great. Death of a hero or a villain is usually great. So it really depends on what you're going to collect. But the biggest advice I could give anybody is collect what you love. If you do it for only one particular purpose, in other words, just speculating, you're going to be very frustrated at times, because like I said before, there's going to be that balance of win some, lose some. And if you are on that emotional roller coaster and you're only doing it for the money, if you tend to lose more than you win, well, you're going to get very frustrated and you're going to end up with a lot of books that you don't love. So what I tell people, no matter what reason you are collecting, whether it's to read them, whether it's to turn around and sell them, whether it's because you like the covers and you just like looking at the artwork, collect them for the fun of it, and you will never go wrong. Now, obviously, there's different reasons to collect comic books and different reasons for people to get into collecting. But make sure you do it and have fun with it. What I would recommend, this is one of the reasons why I love having a YouTube channel, because you get to interact with other people that collect comics. So take advantage of this. Whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or on YouTube, communicate with other people. Try and learn as much as you can. Maybe get advice, because maybe somebody out there has connections to what next character is going to be in what movie, or what TV show is about to debut, so you can get things early enough to save money on them. Because obviously, whether you collect because you want to sell them or you're collecting because you just love to read them, you're better off saving as much money as possible. So things to look out for are the first appearances, maybe costume changes, like, for example, Daredevil #7, where he gets his first red costume, Miss Marvel #20, the original series, where she changed her costume. Things like that people will always gravitate to. Origin stories, I would stay away from origin retolds. I mean, there's a few exceptions to every rule, but most of them, they tend to not be worth as much. Also, first appearances of villains, deaths of characters. The problem with deaths of characters, though, is these days we know that if a character dies, especially a major character, unless it's The Walking Dead, they're going to keep coming back. So my advice to somebody who purchases the death of a comic character, especially if it's a newer book, you're better off buying it and selling it if you're looking to make a profit right away. Because once that character comes back, that value of that book is going to totally plummet. Now, my advice on variant covers. Variant covers can be very beautiful to look at. Some of them are very rare. I mean, you can get a comic from anywhere from 1 in 10 to some books that have 1 in 5,000. So, to me, the artwork, if you like it, purchase it. But if you're doing it for investment purposes, be very careful with variant covers. Because they'll always tell you, oh, they're rare and they're exclusive and all these fancy words and collector's issues. And if you collected like myself in the 90s, you learned the hard way of what happens when you have limited offer supply and collectible comics and fancy covers. What I would recommend is, if you are, again, purchasing to sell, if you're going to get variant covers, try and get them when there's a special event happening, like a first appearance of a character. Because, for example, like The Walking Dead issue number 100, the second print was the first time that Negan was on the cover. So a lot of times when there's a first appearance, if that first appearance is also on the cover, that tends to bring more value. So a lot of times you can have comics, especially new comics, where the first appearance of that character is maybe either a second print or it's one of the variants. Now, you're going to spend a lot of money on these, and some of the covers aren't that great. So if you're collecting them, again, because you really like them, then it won't matter. But if you're doing it for monetary purposes, obviously, you want to make sure you have the best return. Now, as far as storing comics, I definitely recommend this one thing that most people I've seen do, even in comic book stores, and that's hanging your comics on the wall. The reason you really don't want to do that, unless you're, for example, in a basement, is you do not want sunlight anywhere near your comics. Now, you could take a regular photo, put it outside in the sun, and within a couple of weeks, that photo will disappear. So sunlight will affect your comic book covers. So if you have your comics in a lit room exposed to sunlight, it's going to fade the colors. And that's why you see, if you're purchasing comics, you'll see a lot of times where the colors are faded. That's primarily because people left them in the sunlight. And you get, again, you see comic book stores doing this all the time. Other advice when it comes to comic book collecting: if you are going to have your comics stored in comic book boxes, keep them away from radiators or any heat sources, obviously just for the fire hazard. But you also want to make sure you're not keeping it in either an unfinished basement or an attic. And the reason being is they tend to have extreme temperature changes. And when that happens, you start getting moisture in the comic. So even if you have the most expensive Mylars and acid-free backboards, if you store your comics in a place where there's extreme temperatures from summer and winter, it's going to eventually create moisture, and that is going to create mold and start to ruin your comics. So be very careful about where you store them, because where you store them is just as important as how you store them. Now, as far as comic book runs, again, if you collect them to read them, then it doesn't matter. But what I would suggest is try and find a book. For example, if you're not sure if you're going to like a read, you could get, for example, like The Walking Dead. They have the hardcover volumes where it could be anywhere from the first couple of issues to like up to 50 issues to 100 issues at a time. Now, these could get a little expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than buying the comic books and finding out, well, I just spent $100 on a run and I ended up not liking the story. So be very careful about that. Get the hardcovers, you get the graphic novels, and read a little bit of it first. Also, you can go on YouTube, and type in a certain comic, and there are plenty of YouTube channels that will actually read the comic book for you. They will show the comic book and they'll actually read it. So you could do it that way for free. So there's plenty of tips. So basically, when it comes to collecting comics, it's all about having fun. If you do it for speculation, then, think of it as an investment. And if you're going to do it that way, you want to stick with key characters, you want to stick with first appearances, and you also want to make sure you have quality grades. Now, when it comes to grades, be very careful about comic books, especially Silver and Golden Age, because you want to make sure these are not tampered with. Now, tape, especially on a Golden Age book, they don't really recognize as fixing it up. But you have to watch out for simple things. Ask questions. Because when it comes to grading a comic, most people I see when they grade their comics, when they look at them, they just look at the cover. Now, you also have to remember, are the staples rusted? That's going to affect the price. Is there a coupon missing? Because if there is, it will actually be labeled as qualified if you get it graded. Does it have, for example, Batman 181? Does it have a poster, a centerfold? Make sure you ask the questions. So even when you're buying something, because a lot of times on eBay, either the person's going to try and be dishonest, or they may not know. But if they show, for example, and I had this the other day, I was about to buy Batman 181 in a really good condition. Now, they only showed the front cover, and they only showed the back cover. They didn't give any description other than they said it's a nice-looking comic. Now, if I would have bought that, I would have ended up opening it up and finding out it didn't have the cover. So I messaged the person and asked them before I made the purchase. And here's another really good advice speaking of this. When you get a comic from eBay or someplace that mails it to you, make sure you open that book right away and inspect it. Because once a certain amount of time goes by, if you realize that a centerfold is missing or the cover is detached, or there's writing inside the book, or there's stains inside the book, if you don't inspect it, you may not be covered. Now, eBay gives you about a 30-day time period, but I always recommend as soon as you get a book, especially if you buy it for value, make sure you check it out and look for things, because unfortunately there are dishonest people out there, and you don't want to end up being screwed by not looking at your books. Another key thing to do, again, when it comes to eBay or other places that you can mail, when comic books can get mailed to you, don't assume that the person selling it to you knows what they're doing or really even cares. I've had many, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, where you buy a book on eBay or Amazon or wherever, and it comes in some manila envelope and it gets destroyed in the mail. Because a lot of times the post office just doesn't care, and they'll stuff a package, not knowing what it is or the value of it, right into a mailbox. And if you collect comics because you want the condition to be in the best possible shape, any bend is going to damage the comic. And that's one of the bad things about collecting comics is, you could have a gold coin and scratch it with a nail and it won't change the value one bit. But if you take a little corner of a comic book and bend it, you've now potentially lowered the book hundreds of dollars. So what I would recommend to anybody, when you buy from Amazon or eBay or any of these places, make sure you don't assume that they know what they're doing or even want to do it, because they're going to want to save as much money as possible. You tell them how to mail it. And what I always do is say, can you put several thick pieces of cardboard on either side of the comic or on both sides of the comic to protect it? And then explain why. Tell them that you may have had problems in the past with somebody using minimal protection and the comics got bent. Explain to them that if it comes bent, it will have to be returned. You'll get your money back and they'll get a bent comic. Now, we know they're not going to want to do that. It's just that what most of them do is play what I like to call comic Russian roulette, where they'll give you the story of, I do this all the time. Well, they can mail out 1,000 comics, and 999 of them end up fine. But if that one comic gets bent, well, now they lost money, and you now have a comic that's not worth what it was. And especially if you got a comic book for a super deal, you want to make sure it's going to arrive in the condition you ordered it from. So don't ever be afraid to send the message and tell them what you want. Some of them actually appreciate it. So the more helpful you are, the better chances of your comic arriving in the best way. What this also does is it protects you. So if you have in writing that you sent a message to an eBay seller and said, this is how I want the comic mailed, and they choose not to do it, and it arrives damaged, now when you report it to eBay, they can go and check the email and see that you actually informed them how to do it and they chose not to. Also, when it comes to the descriptions of comics, a lot of times people just write the bare minimum on their eBay or Amazon. They'll just show a front cover, maybe even a back cover. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Is the cover attached? Are there any missing pages? Is there, like for example, like I said before with the Batman 181, is there a poster? Things like that. The more you ask, the better chances of getting the comic that you want. So these are all the tips that I highly recommend. The more often that you research, the more often you ask questions, the more often you participate in more than just purchasing, and you learn what's going on, the better chances of getting the comic books you want at the highest grades possible for the cheapest price. Now, also, there are plenty of times where people will say things like, oh, I can't afford a comic. Well, this is where your mind should be put to the test. What can you do to raise money to be able to buy a certain comic? Make it as a motivating tool. So let's say, for example, you want to get Hulk 181. You should take a picture of that comic and place it on your wall. Place it somewhere that you could see it, maybe at your office, maybe in your car. So it motivates you to constantly see it. And you say to yourself, what amount of money do you need to raise to be able to buy that book? And if it means you have to shovel snow or return cans or rake leaves, there's always a way. It's basically just by your imagination. You could do also trades. Now, obviously, you do have to get to know a person, so make sure you just don't do some random trade with somebody you don't know without at least getting to know the person first. But there are plenty of times that you could do trades, and the best way to do it, and this is what I do, I tend to buy multiple copies of a book. So this way, if I ever have to sell one, I still have the book. Or if I want to do a trade, again, I still have the book. So if you can afford, or you get deals where you can get the opportunity to get multiple books, now you can trade them for books that you don't have and that you want. And that's the benefit of things like YouTube. Because if you make videos showing off your comics and you make a video saying, I'm looking to do trades, somebody might come along, see your video and see something that you have and then work a deal with you. So the more communication, the better. So that's the advice I want to give. Hopefully this will help you. If you did, thumbs up always are appreciated. Again, make sure you listen until the end of the video because the subscriber shout out will be at the end of the video. Hit share if you think this is beneficial. And also in the comments section, let me know if there's something that I missed, some kind of advice you would give. The more interaction, the better. So I want to really take this time right now to thank everybody for listening to what I had to say. Hopefully some of my advice will help. And remember, it's all about having fun and not worrying about what other people think about what you do. If you turn around and flip your books because you need to pay bills, or you collect them because you just like the smell of them, as long as you're having fun, that's all that should matter. So my name is Chris. This is my channel, We Love Comics. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great day. And don't forget, it's not you, it's not I, it's We Love Comics. Have a great day, everyone.